It was one of those mornings when the world seemed to move slower for everyone except David. The sky above the city was washed in shades of pale gold and gray, and through the tinted glass of his sleek black car, everything looked clean, distant, perfect, like his life had always been. He had just finished a meeting with investors, another successful one, another step toward expanding his father's empire. Money, comfort, status, all the things he'd been raised to believe mattered most were his by birthright. But something was missing, though he could never quite name what. As he sat in traffic, he caught a glimpse of something simple, something oddly grounding. A small corner cafe with fogged-up windows and a wooden sign that looked hand-painted. It was called the Morning Bean. For some reason, he couldn't explain why he suddenly turned his car around and parked. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the quiet ache that had started to whisper inside him lately, the feeling that life was passing him by in spreadsheets and shallow conversations. When he walked into the cafe, a small bell chimed above the door. The scent of freshly brewed coffee and vanilla filled the air. The place was cozy, humble, alive with laughter and the hiss of the espresso machine. There was warmth here that no luxury penthouse could match. Behind the counter stood a young woman with kind eyes and a smile that reached straight into the coldest parts of a person's heart. She wore a simple apron over her uniform and had her hair tied back in a loose braid. Her name tag read Mary. "Good morning," she said, her voice soft but bright. "What can I get you?" David hesitated for a second, because something about her disarmed him completely. A cappuccino, please, and maybe one of those croissants." "Great choice," she smiled, her dimples deepening slightly. "That's our bestseller." He watched her move behind the counter with a kind of grace that felt effortless. She wasn't rushing, yet everything she did seemed perfectly in rhythm. There was no pretense, no arrogance, just quiet joy in the small things, and David found himself fascinated. When she brought over his order, their hands brushed slightly. It was an accident, but for a fleeting moment, their eyes met, and something stirred in both of them. "Thanks," he murmured. "You're welcome," she said, smiling again before walking away to serve another customer. David sat there longer than he had planned, pretending to check his phone while watching her work. He noticed the way she smiled at everyone, the way she offered an extra cookie to a child whose mother looked tired, the way she wiped down tables between orders as if she genuinely cared. When he finally finished his coffee, he left a tip far larger than he realized and stepped outside. But something inside him told him this wouldn't be the last time he'd see her. The next morning, he came back, and the next. At first, Mary didn't think much of it. He was just another customer. Polite, handsome, clearly from a different world. But as days passed, she began to notice how his presence made the mornings brighter. He always sat at the same table by the window, always ordered the same thing, always said thank you with that slightly shy smile, as if he didn't know how to be casual around her. One day, as she handed him his coffee, she laughed lightly. "You're becoming a regular, you know. Should I just start making your order as soon as I see you come in?" He grinned. "That would save me some time, but then I'd miss talking to you." She blushed, caught off guard by his honesty. "You're not bad at charming people, are you?" "Maybe," he said, smiling, "but I only try when I mean it." From that moment, something began to change between them. Small conversations turned into real talks. She told him she was saving up for her younger brother's college tuition. He told her, hesitantly, that sometimes he felt lost despite having everything. Mary listened, really listened, and for the first time in a long while, David felt seen. Not as a name on a company board, not as an heir to a fortune, but as a man, flawed, uncertain, human. When she spoke about her dreams, her eyes lit up. She told him she wanted to open her own cafe one day, somewhere small but filled with warmth, where people could come not just for coffee but for a piece of comfort. "You'll make it happen," he said genuinely. "You have something rare, Mary. People like being around you. You make them feel alive." Her gaze softened. "You don't even know me that well." "Maybe not," he replied, "but I'd like to." For weeks, their connection grew quietly, naturally, like sunlight creeping through a window each morning. He started helping her with small things. fixing a leaky faucet in the cafe's bathroom, bringing her a new coffee grinder after the old one broke. She tried to refuse the gifts at first, but his kindness wasn't the kind that demanded anything in return. Yet, not everyone saw it that way. One afternoon, Mary's coworker whispered to her, "You know who that guy is, right? That's David Thompson. His family owns half the buildings downtown. He's way out of our league." Mary froze for a moment. She didn't care much for money or names, but suddenly, the weight of their differences felt heavier. Still, when she looked up and saw David smiling at her through the window, holding a coffee just for her, something inside her whispered, maybe love doesn't care about leagues. But not everything was that simple. David's father, Richard Thompson, was a man who built his empire from steel and ambition. He believed emotions were distractions, and humility was a weakness. When David casually mentioned one night that he had met someone, his father leaned back in his chair and smirked. "A barista?" Richard said with disbelief. "Son, people like her are nice to you because it's their job. Don't confuse service with sincerity." "She's not like that," David said, trying to stay calm. Richard's voice hardened. "You have responsibilities. The board expects you to marry within our circle, not waste your time with someone who doesn't understand our world." But David didn't want to live in that world anymore, the one built on appearances and expectations. He wanted something real. The next morning, he went to the cafe earlier than usual, but Mary wasn't there. Her coworker said she had taken the day off. He waited for hours, feeling a strange sense of panic rise inside him. What if she'd found out who he was and decided he wasn't worth the trouble? By evening, he drove aimlessly through the city until he saw her walking home under the soft glow of the streetlights, holding her jacket tight against the cold. He pulled over. "Mary!" She turned, surprised. "David? What are you doing here?" "I went to the cafe, you weren't there. I was worried." She smiled faintly. "I just needed a break. Things have been complicated." He got out of the car, standing a few steps away from her. "Because of me?" She hesitated before nodding. "I know who you are, David. I didn't at first, but now, I don't know what to think. You live in a world I'll never be part of." He stepped closer, his eyes earnest. "You're wrong. The only world I want is one where you're in it." For a long moment, they just stood there, the night quiet around them, their breath visible in the cold air. Then, without another word, she let him walk her home. They didn't talk much, but something had shifted. Something fragile yet unbreakable had started to grow. That night, as Mary lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she couldn't stop thinking about him. The sincerity in his eyes, the warmth in his voice. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing. She was already falling in love, and David, sitting in his car outside her building, knew the same. He had found something no amount of money could buy, something real, something pure. What neither of them knew was how much the world would test that love in the days to come. The next few days felt lighter somehow, as if both Mary and David were moving through a quiet current neither could see but both could feel. He kept coming to the cafe, always finding reasons to stay just a little longer. And she, though she tried to remain professional, found herself waiting for that bell to ring above the door each morning. There was something magnetic between them, something that ignored the invisible line that separated their worlds. But love rarely comes without consequence. One Saturday morning, the cafe was busier than usual. The smell of caramel lattes and toasted bread filled the air, and the line stretched all the way to the door. David, wearing a simple hoodie instead of his usual tailored coat, stood quietly near the window, trying to blend in. He didn't want to be the rich guy. He just wanted to be David. When Mary finally got a break, she approached him, smiling. "You're brave to come on a Saturday. We're chaos today." "I like chaos," he said, chuckling. "It's real." She sat with him for a few minutes, sipping from her own cup. "You know, you don't have to keep coming here every day." "Maybe not," he replied. "But I want to." Mary looked down, shyly stirring her drink. "People talk, you know, about us." "I don't care what people say," David said softly. "Do you?" She hesitated, her heart pounding. I'm not sure yet. Before she could say more, her manager called her back. David stayed for a while, watching her, realizing that for the first time in his life, he wanted something money couldn't simply give him. He wanted to earn her trust. That afternoon, as Mary finished her shift, she found David waiting outside. "Hey," he said, smiling. "I thought maybe I could walk you home?" She raised an eyebrow. "You're not used to walking, are you?" He laughed. "Not really, but I could use the practice." They walked side by side through the busy streets. The cold air made her cheeks pink, and every so often, their hands brushed, each time sending a spark that both pretended not to notice. "So, what's it like?" she asked suddenly. "Being you." He paused. "Honestly, it's lonely sometimes. Everyone wants something. No one really sees me." Mary glanced at him, her eyes soft. "I think I see you." That one sentence hit deeper than he expected. As they reached her building, he stopped. "Can I take you out sometime? Not to some fancy place, just dinner. Maybe that little diner by the park." She smiled, her hesitation melting under the sincerity in his eyes. "Okay, but only if I get to pay for my half." He grinned. "Deal." When she closed the door behind her, she leaned against it, smiling to herself for the first time in a long time. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, the storm was beginning to gather. Richard Thompson had noticed his son's growing absence from company meetings. He had noticed the way David's priorities seemed to shift, and when he finally had one of his assistants look into who was occupying his son's time, he wasn't pleased with the answer. A coffee shop waitress. Richard called David into his office the next day. The atmosphere was cold, the kind of silence that carried weight. "I hear you've been spending a lot of time at a cafe," Richard began, flipping through some papers he didn't need. David's jaw tightened. "Yeah, I've met someone there." Richard leaned back, smirking. "A waitress. She's more than that." "I'm sure she's lovely, son, but you're forgetting who you are. We don't mix with that kind of crowd." "That kind of crowd?" David repeated, anger rising in his chest. "You mean honest, hardworking people?" Richard sighed. "Don't be dramatic. I built this company for you. You can't throw your future away for a fling." "It's not a fling," David snapped. "And maybe I don't want your version of the future." The room fell silent. Finally, Richard said coldly, "You'll regret this." David walked out without another word. Their first date was everything neither of them expected and everything they needed. They sat in a small diner with flickering neon lights, sharing fries and laughing about nothing. For a few hours, they weren't a rich man and a waitress. They were just two people falling in love. After dinner, they walked by the park. Snow had started to fall in soft flakes, catching the light from the street lamps. Mary tilted her head back, letting a few fall on her cheeks. "You look happy," David said, watching her. "I am," she whispered. "I haven't felt this way in a long time." He smiled, reaching out to take her hand. "Me neither." She didn't pull away. That night, as he drove home, he couldn't stop smiling. For once, his life made sense. But love, like snow, has a way of melting under the heat of other people's judgment. A few days later, Mary came to work to find a stranger waiting for her. A well-dressed woman, cold-eyed, with a perfect smile that didn't reach her face. "Mary Collins?" the woman asked. "Yes," Mary said carefully. "I'm Julia, David's assistant." She handed Mary an envelope. "Mr. Thompson asked me to deliver this." Mary opened it slowly. Inside was a check, a large one, $10,000. Julia's tone was polite but sharp. "It's a gesture of goodwill. Consider it a way to make things easier. I'm sure you understand that David needs to focus on his future." Mary's hands trembled as she stared at the check. "You think I'm after his money?" Julia's smile didn't waver. "Everyone has their price, dear. Take it. Walk away." Mary felt her face burn. She handed the check back, her voice shaking. "Tell Mr. Thompson I'm not for sale." When David came to the cafe that afternoon, she wasn't there. She had taken the day off, unable to face him until she calmed down. He called her, but she didn't answer. He texted, but there was silence. The next morning, he found her sitting on a bench near the park, looking lost in thought. "Mary," he said softly, sitting beside her. "What happened?" She looked at him, her eyes full of hurt. "Your father sent someone. She offered me money to stay away from you." David's stomach dropped. "He what?" I told her no. "But, David," her voice cracked. "Maybe she's right. Maybe we come from two different worlds. I can't be the reason you lose your family." He took her hands in his. "Listen to me. You are not a mistake. You are the only real thing in my life right now." Tears welled in her eyes. "Then prove it." He looked at her, determination hardening his voice. "I will." That evening, David showed up at a charity gala his father was hosting, wearing the same suit he'd worn countless times. But this time, he wasn't there to impress anyone. When Richard saw him, he smiled tightly. "Glad you came. Maybe you've come to your senses." "Actually," David said calmly, "I came to tell you something." Every head turned as he continued, his voice steady. "You taught me how to make money, Father, but you never taught me what it means to live. Mary did, and I won't let you decide who I love." The room fell silent. Richard's face went pale with fury, but David didn't stay long enough to hear the response. He walked out, free for the first time in his life. When he reached Mary's apartment, he knocked softly. She opened the door, eyes wide. "What are you doing here?" He smiled faintly. "Proving it." Before she could speak, he pulled her into his arms, holding her close as snow began to fall outside once more. And for that moment, nothing else mattered. No wealth, no class, no names. Just love, pure and defiant against the cold. The morning after David's bold declaration, the world seemed brighter for both of them. Mary woke with a strange mixture of fear and joy. Fear that the world might punish them for daring to love across its invisible lines. And joy because, for once, she felt chosen. David, on the other hand, felt lighter than he had in years. He'd finally stood up to his father, finally said the words he'd swallowed his entire life. He didn't care about the consequences anymore. He only cared about her. They spent the weekend together, not in luxury, but in simplicity. A walk through the park, a late breakfast in her small kitchen. They laughed, talked, and found comfort in the quiet moments between words. For the first time, they weren't pretending to be anyone else. But as the weekend faded, reality began to creep in. By Monday morning, the newspapers were already filled with headlines. Bank heir seen with waitress, Thompson family silent. Cameras waited outside David's building, and social media was buzzing with gossip. At the cafe, Mary noticed customers whispering. Some smiled at her with warmth, others with judgment. Her coworkers stared, curious and envious, and her manager pulled her aside. "Mary," he said awkwardly, "you're a great employee, but the attention's becoming distracting." She swallowed hard. "I understand." That afternoon, she called David. "We need to talk." When he arrived, she looked pale and tired. "This," she said, motioning between them, "isn't easy for me. Everyone's talking. My job's at risk." David looked stricken. "Then quit. I'll help you find something better." She shook her head. "That's not the point. I don't want your money, David. I want to stand on my own." He nodded slowly, realizing how fragile their balance was. "Then we'll find a way together. I'll protect what we have." But protection wasn't easy when his own family was determined to destroy it. That night, Richard confronted him again. "You think love will pay your bills, David? You think this girl understands your world?" "I don't want your world anymore," David said calmly. "Then you're no longer part of this family business." The words hung like a sentence. David didn't argue. He simply walked out, knowing there was no turning back. Weeks passed. Without his father's fortune, David began to experience life differently. He rented a modest apartment and found work as a financial consultant, starting from scratch. Mary supported him emotionally, proud of his courage, but she too struggled. Some nights, she questioned if she'd done the right thing. She'd never wanted to tear a family apart. Yet, every time David held her, Every time he looked at her with that unguarded love, she knew she couldn't let go. Still, fate had one more test for them. One rainy evening, as Mary was leaving work, a car stopped beside her. The tinted window rolled down. It was Richard. "Get in," he said coldly. Mary hesitated, but his tone left no room for argument. Inside, Richard spoke plainly. "You've cost my son everything. Do you think that's love? You've dragged him into a life beneath him." She looked at him, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. "He made his own choice." Richard leaned forward. "You're destroying his future. If you care about him, truly care, you'll leave before it's too late." That night, Mary cried more than she ever had. She wanted to believe in love, but she couldn't bear the thought of being his downfall. The next morning, she left a note on David's table. "You gave me courage when I had none, but I can't watch you lose everything because of me. I'll always love you, but I have to go." When David found the note, his heart shattered. He searched for her everywhere, but she was gone. She had quit her job, changed her number, disappeared into the city. For weeks, he felt lost. He worked, ate little, slept less. Life without her was empty, even though he had chosen this path for love. Then, one afternoon, while walking through the park where they had first laughed together, he saw her, standing by a bench, holding a bouquet of daisies, her eyes red but full of light. He froze. "Mary!" She turned, tears welling. "I couldn't stay away." He ran to her, pulling her into his arms. "Don't ever leave again." She smiled through her tears. "Not unless you ask me to." He kissed her forehead, whispering, "Then I'll never ask." And as the sun broke through the clouds, they stood there, two souls who had risked everything for something priceless. Love that didn't care about wealth, pride, or name. It was love that survived the storm. It was love that finally set them free. The next morning, David woke up feeling different. It wasn't about the luxury around him anymore. Not the satin sheets, the view of the skyline, or the smell of imported coffee filling his penthouse. What filled his mind was the image of Mary, standing by that small counter, smiling at him with tired eyes that still held kindness. He wanted to see her again, not as a customer, not as someone observing from a distance, but as a man who wanted to truly know her world. So he returned to the cafe. When she saw him, Mary was surprised. Her eyes widened just a little, but she quickly smiled and said, "Back for another latte, Mr. Bennett?" He smiled softly. "Actually, this time, I came for the person who made it." Mary laughed awkwardly, thinking he was joking. But David's expression didn't change. He asked her about her day, her dreams, her life outside this little cafe. At first, she was hesitant. She didn't trust easily, especially someone from a life she could never touch. But the sincerity in his eyes was disarming. They talked for hours that day, about books, music, family, and things they had both lost along the way. She told him about her mother, who had been sick for years, and how every dollar she earned went toward medication and rent. David listened, silently, feeling a pang in his chest. It was the first time someone had spoken to him without caring about his last name or his wealth. In the weeks that followed, he began visiting every day. Sometimes he'd just sit quietly while she worked. Sometimes he'd help her carry supplies or fix a broken light. The staff started teasing Mary, saying she had a secret admirer. She'd laugh and brush it off, though her heart fluttered every time he looked at her. But rumors began to spread outside the cafe. Whispers in the elite circles that David Bennett, heir to a fortune, was wasting his time on a girl who didn't even own a car. His father found out, and the confrontation was immediate. "David," his father said one evening, "you're embarrassing the family. Do you have any idea what people are saying? You can't be serious about this girl." David's voice was calm, but firm. "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." His father laughed bitterly. "She's after your money, David. That's all. That's what they all want." But David shook his head. "She doesn't even know who I really am. I never told her my last name. She thinks I'm just David." His father's expression changed, disbelief, then anger. "You're being a fool." David walked away before he could hear another word. The next day, he returned to the cafe, but Mary wasn't there. Her coworker said she had taken a few days off because her mother's condition had worsened. Without thinking, David asked for her address. When he arrived at her small apartment, he saw through the open window the truth of her life. Peeling paint, second-hand furniture, and a woman lying in a small bed, breathing weakly. Mary was sitting beside her, holding her hand, whispering softly. He didn't want to intrude, so he quietly left a basket of groceries at the door and slipped away unnoticed. That night, Mary found the basket and a small note inside that said, "For the ones who make the world brighter just by being kind." She smiled through tears. Somehow, she knew it was from him. Days later, she returned to work. When she saw him again, she whispered, "You didn't have to do that." He smiled. "I wanted to." Then she looked at him, really looked. "Who are you, David? Why do you keep doing this?" He hesitated. The truth weighed heavily on his heart. "I'm not who you think I am. My full name is David Bennett. My family owns Bennett Holdings." Her eyes widened in shock. She stepped back slightly. "You're that Bennett?" He nodded, quietly. For a moment, she didn't say a word. Then she whispered, "You shouldn't be here. You don't belong in my world." "Maybe your world is exactly where I belong," he said softly. Tears welled in her eyes, but she shook her head. "You don't understand. People like you don't stay. And people like me, we get hurt." David reached for her hand, but she gently pulled away. He didn't insist. He knew she needed time. As he left the cafe that day, a cold wind brushed against him. For the first time, he understood what it meant to fight not for status, not for power, but for love that might never love him back. Yet deep down, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wouldn't give up on her. Not this time. Not for anyone. Because sometimes the richest hearts are born from the humblest souls. And David Bennett, the man who once thought he had everything, realized he had never truly lived, until he met the girl who served coffee with a smile that changed his world. The next few days felt painfully long for David. He kept replaying her words. "People like you don't stay." It stung more than he wanted to admit, not because she was wrong, but because deep down he knew why she believed it. People in his world didn't stay for love. They stayed for appearances, for deals, for names on paper. But Mary, she didn't care for any of that. And that was exactly why he needed her. Meanwhile, Mary was struggling too. She tried to focus on work, to lose herself in the rhythm of the cafe. The hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of customers, the scent of roasted beans. But every sound reminded her of him. The way he listened. The way he looked at her like she was the only person in the room. But she also remembered the way her world had always worked. People with money took what they wanted and left behind pieces of people like her. She told herself to forget him, but her heart wouldn't listen. That afternoon, as she left the cafe, she found him waiting outside. He was standing by his car, not the luxury sports car he usually drove, but an old, simple one. He looked almost ordinary. "Mary," he said quietly, "can we talk?" She hesitated, glancing around. "David, you shouldn't be here. I just want 5 minutes," he said softly. "After that, if you still want me to leave, I will." Something in his tone made her stop. She crossed her arms, nodding slightly. 5 minutes. He took a deep breath. "You were right. I don't belong in your world. But I don't belong in mine anymore either. Not since I met you." Her eyes softened, but she stayed quiet. "I didn't tell you who I was because I didn't want you to see the name. I wanted you to see the person. I know it sounds impossible, but with you, I finally felt real." She looked at him, her voice trembling. "David, you don't understand what it's like to live with nothing. To choose between paying rent or buying medicine. To wonder if tomorrow will be worse than today." He stepped closer, his gaze sincere. "Then let me understand. Show me." Tears welled in her eyes. "It's not that simple." "Maybe it is," he whispered. "Maybe love isn't about living in the same world. It's about building one together." Mary turned away, afraid of believing him. But something in her heart shifted. a tiny spark of hope that refused to die. That night, she sat beside her mother, who was resting quietly. Her mother opened her eyes weakly and smiled. "You've been quiet, sweetheart. Thinking about that young man again." Mary blushed. "Mom, he's from another life. He's David Bennett." Her mother chuckled softly. "So what? Does he make you happy?" Mary looked down. "He does. But it'll never work." Her mother took her hand gently. "You know what's worse than a broken heart, Mary? A heart that never dared to love. You were born to be brave. Don't let fear decide for you." That night, those words echoed in her mind. The next morning, she made a decision. When David arrived at the cafe, she was already waiting outside. She was nervous, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Good morning," she said, handing him one. "I made this myself. Figured it's about time I shared something from my world." David smiled, surprised. "Does this mean I can have another 5 minutes?" "Maybe 10, she said, smiling shyly. They sat on a nearby bench, sipping coffee as the city woke up around them. For the first time, there was no tension, no fear. Just 2 people trying to find a way to meet halfway. They started spending more time together. Not in expensive restaurants, but in parks, bookstores, and small diners. He learned how to make her favorite sandwich. She taught him how to laugh without worrying who was watching. But not everyone was happy. The tabloids got hold of their story. Heir to Bennett fortune spotted with cafe girl. Cameras began showing up outside her workplace, and whispers turned into judgment. One evening, after work, she found a note taped to the cafe door that said, "Gold digger." Her hands trembled as she ripped it down. She didn't cry. Not until she saw David waiting for her across the street. Then everything broke. He ran to her. "Mary, what happened?" She showed him the note. "This is what your world thinks of me." His face darkened. "I don't care what they think." "But I do," she shouted, tears spilling down. "Because they'll never stop, and I can't live under their hate. You can walk away, I can't." He was silent for a moment, then took her hands gently. "Then let's go somewhere they can't find us." "David." "No, listen to me. I'll give up everything. The company, the money, the name. None of it matters if I can't be with you." She looked at him, stunned. "You'd really do that?" He nodded, his eyes unwavering. "For you, yes." Mary covered her mouth, tears falling freely now. "You're crazy." "Maybe," he said softly, "but I've never been more certain of anything." That night, they walked through the quiet streets hand in hand, no longer caring who saw. The world around them faded. The noise, the wealth, the pain. What remained was something simple, pure, and real. When they reached her apartment, she turned to him. "I don't want you to give up everything. I just want you to be sure. Love isn't a rescue, David. It's a choice. Every day." He smiled gently. "Then let me keep choosing you." And she couldn't fight it anymore. She reached up, and for the first time, she kissed him, softly, hesitantly, but filled with everything she had been afraid to feel. It wasn't the kiss of a rich man and a poor woman. It was the kiss of 2 souls who finally found home in each other. As the city lights flickered above them, Mary whispered, "Maybe, just maybe, our worlds aren't so different after all." David smiled. Not anymore. For the first time, she believed it. And though they didn't know what tomorrow would bring, whether his father would disown him or the world would keep whispering, in that moment, under the glow of 1,000 lights, they knew one truth that no one could take away. Love, when real, doesn't ask where you come from. It only asks where you're willing to go together. The next morning dawned quietly, as if the city itself was holding its breath. David woke early, watching the soft light pour through the curtains of his apartment. An apartment that, by tomorrow, might no longer be his. He had made his decision. For the first time in his life, it wasn't about business or image or legacy. It was about truth. He put on a simple gray jacket, leaving behind the tailored suits that once defined him. He didn't even take his driver or his watch, just his keys and a small velvet box that had been sitting on his desk for weeks. At the same time, across town, Mary tied her hair back and helped her mother eat breakfast. The older woman smiled faintly. "You look nervous, sweetheart." Mary laughed softly. "Maybe I am." Her mother squeezed her hand. "If he loves you the way I think he does, then you don't have to be afraid." Mary smiled, but she wasn't sure. Love was beautiful but fragile, like glass, and she had spent her life surrounded by things that broke too easily. When she arrived at the cafe, her heart skipped a beat. David was waiting there outside, in the same spot where they'd first talked. But something was different. He looked free. "Good morning," he said, smiling. "You're up early," she teased, walking toward him. He nodded. "Couldn't sleep. I had a few things to take care of." She raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" He hesitated, then handed her an envelope. "This is the deed to my company shares. I sold them." Mary froze. "David, no." "I told you," he said softly. "I wanted to be sure. Now I am." Her eyes filled with tears. "You can't just give up your whole life for me." "I didn't give it up," he said gently. "I exchanged it for a different kind of life, one that means something." She shook her head, overwhelmed. "You didn't have to prove anything to me." "I wasn't proving it to you," he whispered. "I was proving it to myself." Before she could respond, he knelt down. Right there on the sidewalk as morning commuters passed by, barely noticing the quiet miracle unfolding. He opened the small velvet box. Inside was a delicate silver ring, simple but elegant. Not from a luxury brand, not dripping with diamonds. Just pure, honest beauty. "Mary," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "I don't know where this road will take us. We'll probably struggle. We'll fight. We'll doubt. We'll face the world's judgment. But I also know this. I don't want to walk through any of it without you." Her hands covered her mouth, tears streaming freely now. "So," he continued, smiling through his nerves, "will you take a chance on a man who once had everything and now only wants you?" She laughed through her tears. "David, you're insane." "Completely," he said, grinning, "but hopelessly in love." For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The cars, the chatter, the noise, all of it faded into silence. Then she whispered the words that changed everything. "Yes." The crowd that had gathered clapped and cheered, but neither of them heard it. He slipped the ring on her finger, stood up and kissed her. Not the nervous kiss of two people unsure, but the deep, unshakable kiss of two hearts finally at peace. They spent the rest of the day walking through the city like children discovering it for the first time. No fancy restaurants, no chauffeurs, just laughter, hand-holding, and promises whispered in the cold wind. Weeks turned into months. Mary's life began to change, but not in the way people expected. She didn't quit her job at the cafe. In fact, she and David worked together to open a new one, a small, cozy place called Two Worlds Cafe. It became a symbol of something beautiful, where anyone could belong, no matter who they were or where they came from. One evening, a familiar face walked in, David's father. The old man looked tired, smaller somehow. "Dad," David said quietly. The old man looked around the cafe, his gaze landing on Mary. "So this is what you gave everything for?" David nodded. "This is what I found everything for." His father sighed. "You've changed." "Maybe," David said softly, "but for the better." There was a long pause. Then the old man smiled faintly. "Your mother would have liked her." Mary smiled back, tears in her eyes. "Would you like some coffee, sir?" He nodded. "I think I would." And that was how healing began, quietly, over a cup of coffee, in a little cafe born out of love. Years passed, and the cafe thrived. People came not just for the coffee, but for the feeling. The place had a soul, one that came from two people who believed that love could rewrite fate. One rainy evening, long after closing time, Mary stood by the window, watching droplets slide down the glass. David came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Do you ever think about how it all started?" she asked. "All the time," he said softly. "One cup of coffee, one smile, one moment that changed everything." She turned to face him, resting her head on his chest. Sometimes, I still can't believe it's real. He kissed her forehead. It's as real as you and me. Outside, the city lights reflected in the puddles, shimmering like pieces of their past. Broken, beautiful, and reborn. As they closed the cafe for the night, Mary turned off the lights, leaving only the soft glow of the sign outside. Two Worlds Cafe, where love meets life. And as the rain fell softly on the quiet streets, their laughter echoed through the empty cafe, a living reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin in the most ordinary places, with a cup of coffee, a kind word, and a heart brave enough to believe. Because love isn't about having everything. It's about finding the one person who makes you realize you already do.